Welcome all hunters, anglers, trappers, and shooters to the only fish and wildlife conservation podcast that goes behind the scenes of the business of conservation, the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Our podcast is hosted by John Gassett from the Wildlife Management Institute and Jim Cucaruto of the Outdoor Stewards of Conservation Foundation. John and Jim will talk with experts from all sectors of the conservation arena about their passion for conserving the great outdoors. So please welcome our hosts of the Connecting with Conservation podcast, John and Jim.
Welcome to Connecting with Conservation. I'm John Gassett with the Wildlife Management Institute, here again with my co-host, Jim Cucaruto, and a special guest, Chuck Sykes from Alabama DNR.
Glad to be here. Thank y'all.
Exciting. We've had a good run of folks. The last couple of podcasts we've worked with industry, and of course, Connecting with Conservation, we try to get industry, agency, and NGOs on here. So excited to have Chuck Sykes with Alabama. Is it DCNR? Tell us what DCNR is and
yeah, it's the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries Division.
Yeah, and Chuck, you're one of our, I believe you're probably, if not the longest tenured director, sitting director, you're in the top three, I'd say, right now.
I am number 2 in the country. I think the director in California has me by just a couple of months. And
Chuck Bottom, yep, I believe you're right, because Chuck came on in 2012 when I was AFL president. I got to meet him then. So he's hung in there. But yeah, you're long served director, and I just want to start off by talking a little bit about that. You know, what we're seeing from the time, the time I started as director to we overlap by about a year to where you are now. We've spanned over 20 years, and we're not seeing that anymore. We're seeing directors getting shorter and shorter tenure, a lot of times coming from outside of agencies. What kind of impacts do you think that possibly could have on conservation moving forward?
Well, the turnover is pretty scary. In the next 2 weeks, I will have served 12 years, and that's about like dog years. The way directors go. I think the average tenure now is just, if it's 3, that's a stretch. It's a tick under 3 years. I know in the 12 years I've been here, Arkansas, just for example, they're on their 5th director. So it's the turnover is pretty scary. I can't say anything about people coming in from outside because I came in from the outside. I think every once in a while it's good to have a fresh set of eyes, but it's difficult. I will say that if I had not had a really good tenured staff there that supported me, I wouldn't have made it. That's critical.
And there's sort of two types of outside, and I put you sort of in that middle category of your background is in wildlife conservation. You just were in the private sector and came into the agency versus, we do have directors coming on that, really they don't have a background in wildlife conservation. They're in some cases lawyers or, business folks that come in from outside, and that's got to be an even steeper learning curve.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I do have a degree in wildlife management. I had a consulting business where I managed property all over the country and actually produced a television show on Outdoor Channel for over a decade that showcased wildlife and land management. So I did at least know the wildlife side of it, but the political side, the HR side, all of the pitfalls that come with office life, I had no clue. When I sat down behind my desk the first day, that was the first day I had ever sat down in an office. My office was my truck, driving around and being on the property. So, yeah, it was a huge learning curve for me. And again, if I had not had an assistant director that had been there almost 40 years in the agency, and all of my section chiefs were tenured individuals that I knew some of them, but most of them I didn't. If I hadn't had their support helping me get through the day-to-day stuff, it'd be a long, hard road for somebody.
Yeah. I've often said those assistant directors and assistant chiefs, now they're sort of the unsung heroes of agencies because they do all the dirty work, all the grunt work to make the directors and the chiefs look good, and
Absolutely. I mean, my assistant director, it's hard to believe he's been with the agency for 50 years. He started when I was 3.5 years old. And he comes to work every day and he loves the day-to-day budget, personnel, HR. He loves it. I don't love it. I had rather be looking at big picture things and being out front rather than having to get down in the day-to-day minutia. So he saved me, no doubt.
So what for the folks listening that might not know, so every state's got we'll call them DNRs, Department of Natural Resources, Game and Fish Department. So what are you guys tasked with? What are some of the main things that the Alabama DCNR?
Well, our department has 4 divisions. We have a state parks division, a state lands division, a marine resources, and then mine, which is wildlife and freshwater fisheries. So we handle just about anything that goes on in the state, from oil and gas leases to running all the parks to all the marine resources issues with Gulf fisheries to wildlife and freshwater fisheries. We handle it all. For us, for my division, our mission is pretty simple: is to protect, enhance, conserve the natural resources of the state of Alabama for Alabamians and future generations. So it's pretty simple. Our job is to look after the natural resources for the state and make sure that future generations have the same opportunities that we do.
Well, I chuckled when you said it's pretty simple. It's not. I mean, there's like hundreds, if not thousands, of species, right, that you have to manage, and hundreds of thousands of acres, right, that you have to manage as well. So, I know you said it's simple, but I don't think it's all that simple.
As a redneck from South Alabama with a biology degree, it is simple. Wildlife management is simple. Everything needs food, cover, and water. You have to have enough sense to find the lowest, what the leaky hole in the bucket is, and start fixing it. When you throw people in the mix, that's when it runs in the ditch. That's what makes it difficult, and that can be legislatively, that can be upper administration, that can be a special interest group, that can even be your own employees. Wildlife and land management, John knows, is not rocket science. We can figure that out, but trying to get the political and social aspects to go along with it where you've got support, that's where it becomes a stretch.
yeah, it's an overused cliche, but you're right. Wildlife management's checkers, people management's chess. It's you talk about the leaky bucket and trying to plug the lowest hole. Well, when the people management, when you get the bucket gets hit with an axe.
Well, I mean, people, and not only the folks that you mentioned, but increasing populations, right? Then there's a new development that's built for 100 houses that took away habitat for, deer and squirrels and whatever. So I know a big part of DNR's responsibility is land management and buying up whatever land it can and managing that land for healthy wildlife populations. And I know you've done a good job of doing that. Do you have any, I've been to a couple areas down there, but do you have any in particular that you guys are working on right now and making habitat for a certain species?
In Alabama, it is a predominantly private land state. It's around 97% private. So we've got probably 800,000 acres that we manage for public access. Sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty small for the overall land base of Alabama. But that's all quite a few of our constituents have to hunt. So we're constantly looking for new areas that we don't want to get our staff overextended, where we can manage it properly. So we work with a lot of TMOs and REITs looking at their larger land bases, and just for some of those, we're working on conservation easements where we just get the hunting rights on it in perpetuity. For some, we're buying outright, putting staff on the ground and managing it to a T for an upper tier hunting opportunity. So we've got a little bit of everything, but one thing that you said for specific species, we utilized a lot of federal funding, reverted federal funding that other states didn't use to secure red hill salamander habitat. We've got an endangered salamander in sort of west southern Alabama, and it's only found in a certain geographic region called the Red Hills. And worked with Leo Miranda at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we've been able to put together now about 12,000 acres in an area of the state where we really didn't have anything. And it was all for red hill salamander critical habitat securement, but now we've got great deer, turkey hunting, bird watching, hiking trails, you name it. And what I've tried to tell people is the salamander doesn't care whether deer hunters are out there. The deer don't care whether that land was bought for salamander habitat. It's not mutually exclusive. You can do work for threatened and endangered species and still benefit game species and hunters.
And I've been on a trip, I think, down there with you and Leo, and actually seen one of those salamanders and held one in my hands. They're pretty impressive. I think they're our largest terrestrial salamander.
I think so. Yeah, they're pretty cool critters.
Yeah, they're really cool, and like you say, all that habitat does great things for a lot of game species we like, and like you said, the salamander doesn't care. He's just going to live in his little burrow there and stick his head out every now and then. But they're I always when I saw them, I'm not a I like all kinds of wildlife, but I'm not a huge hurt guy, just not what I do. But I thought, man, I bet a largemouth bass would hit that.
Yeah, doesn't it look like something that would go good across a lily pad?
Oh yeah.
Well, it's funny that you bring up largemouth bass, and two things. Like, first of all, a lot of people that think of DNRs think of hunting, right? But you manage those salamanders, and last I checked, that's not a huntable species, right? So you manage the flora, the fauna, the pollinators, and what's good for the butterflies and bees and birds is good for the deer and turkey and all those other species here. So that's really important for folks to understand. But so let's talk a little bit about fisheries and largemouth bass there. And I know Alabama has got a lot of Great Lakes that see a heavy, amount of fishing on them. So
Yeah, I'm gonna hit one thing before I get to that. I was on a panel at the Wildlife Society last year, and one of the other panelists was saying the problem with state agencies is all they do is manage for one or two iconic species that hunters pay for, and that was all the buzzwords. That's it. That's why we got to change how DNRs are run. That's why we got to change how commissions are set up. And it's a load of bull. When I started throwing facts at them, they couldn't refute it. It doesn't matter whether I like it or not. I'm a hunter, I'm a fisherman, I'm a consumptive user, but my job is to manage everything in the state. So we spend just as much time and energy on crunchy critters, aquatics, birds, the whole 9 yards, because you said it, what's good for one is typically good for others. So good management is good for everything, game and non-game. So I'll get off my soapbox about that. But getting on to the fish now. Usually, well, in my tenure, fish go relatively unnoticed. They're under the water, you can't see them. It's real easy to fuss at us about a deer or a turkey, but fish, you just assume they're there and everything's okay. Well, we started having some complaints that some of our lakes on a certain river system were not as productive as they once were. So we needed to start stocking. Well, I'm sorry. I've been in the private sector. I manage land all over the country. You can start over and stock a small farm pond from 2 acres to 20 or 50 acres, maybe even 100 acres. and stocking will help. On a 60,000 acre reservoir, stocking fish, you might as well just take that money and throw it in the water, because you're doing is providing bait or meal for some of the fish that's already there. So we tried education, that didn't work. Then they went the legislative route to make us start doing stocking. So we're working with that. So we decided to fund a research project with Auburn University to see what was actually going on. And I know this is where you're going with this. The study is back. It's going through the peer review process. But what we found out was Alabama does have an astronomically high amount of bass tournaments. Everything from high school tournaments to Joe Blow's bait shop down the road, all the way to Major League Fishing, bass, Alabama Bass Trail. I mean, it just goes on and on. Alabama is a destination for bass tournaments. And what that study proved was they were having a detrimental impact on the fish. They were really hammering our larger fish, which are typically older fish and typically females. And the smaller fish that they were taking out, I say smaller, they were the younger fish with the better genetics, because they reached a certain poundage quicker than the slower growing. So they were really having a profound impact on this river system. So we are looking at proposing a regulation that will impact the tournaments on these lakes. And Lord have mercy, Chicken Little, the sky's falling. Economic development, economic impact. You're going to shut down tournaments and blah blah blah. It's like, y'all, just because I'm a state employee, I do understand economics, and I understand economic development. Also understand if there ain't no fish, there ain't gonna be no tournament. So you can suffer a little bit now for the long run, or you can destroy it and it be gone. And that's one of the difficult things about what we do, what all state agencies do, is we have to make tough decisions, because we are looking 10, 20, 50, 100 years down the road. And y'all know today's society is all about me and all about right now. It is me, look at what I've done, and they're not looking at the future. So we have to make some unpopular decisions and hope that we can get enough support to get things done. One of the toughest lessons that I had to learn coming in from the outside, and John, you'll appreciate this, Carter Smith, I won't ever forget. Carter's a retired director in Texas. He told a story at one of my first meetings. And the gist of it was, he was at a public meeting in front of a judge. And he said, "Judge, we've got science on our side." And the judge said, "Not my science." So political science and social science trumps wildlife science far too many times. So even though we've got the data, here's the problem, here's the solution. If we can't get buy-in, we can't get it done, because politics is in everything.
We talk about our profession about the tragedy of the commons. Anytime you have a public resource and a public access to that resource, if you don't control that impact of the public, they'll take the last fish, they'll take the last deer, the last turkey. It's like you said, it's the here and now. I want mine, and I'm not concerned about what's 5 years, 10 years, 50 years down the road.
Yep. And it's not everybody. We are getting just as many on this fishing thing that are saying, "Thank you for doing something. It's about time. This needs to happen. How can I help?" But y'all both know the vocal minority are the ones that scream the loudest, have the biggest stick politically. So you hope that the average angler who's got a pontoon boat or a John boat that goes out there with the grandkids on the weekends, if that group will speak up, this is a done deal. We'll get done what we need to get done. But that's another issue that we deal with, is complacency among our traditional users. it's hard to get them. There's no longer big sportsman's clubs and rod and gun clubs and all that. It's just everybody's at home, and unless it messes with them in their backyard, typically they're not going to say anything. They're not going to try to rally the troops and get those grassroots to come help an agency when it's time to do the right thing.
Yeah, it's been my experience that sportsmen and women in general aren't joiners. As long as there's plenty out there, they don't want to join a group. That's not their primary objective. They join groups like Ducks Unlimited and Turkeys and all that when all that happened is when there was a scarcity. We didn't have any of those things, so they banded together to make things happen politically. But when they're plentiful on the landscape, that urgency seems to go away.
Well, if you think about it, the majority of today's hunters don't remember the scarcity. They weren't here. I mean, I'll be 54 in a week or so. And I can remember just on our family place when I was a kid, I started following Daddy around when I was 5 or 6 years old. If you hunted every day for 2 weeks and saw a deer, you made a note of it. By the time I was in high school, I was seeing 30 and 40 deer a day. Both of them were unhealthy sides of the equation. One was too low, one was too high. Well, now you see 8 or 10, which is good. That's what the habitat can hold. But you have a couple of different things. You got a lot of people saying, well, it ain't like it used to be. I used to see 30 or 40. Yeah, but it still wasn't good. And then you got some of the younger hunters, they don't know any. They don't know when there weren't deer here. They don't know when you hunted all season and hopefully saw one turkey. They don't remember it. They just know how it is now. So it's always going to be fine. So why are you burdening me with these rules and regulations? They'll take care of themselves.
I know you guys, on top of all that fun stuff, you also manage target shooting ranges, and again, are doing a great job of providing that opportunity. And the reason that came about is because of one of the funding sources for your agency is target shooters. So tell us a little bit about what's going on down there.
Yeah, I mean, the three of us know that hunters paid for conservation. If it wasn't for hunters, we wouldn't have what we have. But over the past decade, that trend is shifted drastically toward target shooters paying for conservation. Even though most of them don't know it, they are. The guns that they're buying, all the ammunition that they're running through, that's what's really paying for our staff and paying for habitat work right now is target shooters. So we have had to change. We're not walking away from our traditional group, but we've had to add to. We need to take care of who is taking care of us right now, in addition to our hunters and anglers. So we have purchased several blocks of land that we are going to use for some limited hunting, but they are designed to build a state-of-the-art shooting range, because we've got to give those people in urban and suburban settings a safe and affordable place to go shoot. When I started, and back when John was director, I'd say 90% of public shooting ranges were on the middle of a WMA, 18 miles down a muddy dirt road. And, people went there to sight in their rifle the day before deer season. Well, now with all the new gun buyers out there, most of them are not hunters, and most of them are city dwellers or suburbanites, and they don't want to take their Lexus down an 18-mile dirt road to go learn how to shoot their pistol. So we've had to change our philosophy on shooting ranges. We're having to add amenities like bathrooms and lights and staffed ranges where those people feel comfortable showing up and learning. We've started Firearms 101 programs where we're teaching first-time gun buyers how to be safe and handle their gun properly. Whether they hunt or not, they need to be responsible gun owners. And one thing about our ranges, we do use PR dollars and target marksmanship dollars to build them, so they're license-based. So all of these people that are not hunters, in order for them to utilize a range, they might have to buy a $10 heritage license. Well, that gives us an opportunity to tell them our story as to why they have to have that license. And I'm going to say the vast majority of those people are extremely supportive once they understand what that money goes for.
Well, that's the gist of what this whole podcast is about, is building that understanding of how conservation pays for our fish and wildlife resources, our shooting ranges, our lakes and streams, the areas where we like to recreate. And throw a few numbers out, $1.5 billion a year just in excise tax paid by sportsmen and women. $4 billion a year if you had licenses and permits into that. So it's not when folks like you mentioned earlier at the conference who say, well, all these agencies care about are deer and turkeys because that's what people want to hunt. Where are you going to replace that $4.5 billion a year if we don't take care of those folks? But and we've had that, that of course the excise tax comes from industry products, fire and ammo manufacturers, fishing tackle, boat fuel, archery equipment, all those sorts of funding sources, and agencies and those industry folks have had sort of a cyclic relationship. It's ebbed and flowed. Sometimes we're mad at each other, sometimes we're best friends. But the little historical fact is for 15 years we used to have an annual meeting where we brought agency heads like you and industry leaders together, and the first time we ever did that, where we actually put them in a wild setting, I'll say, in a deer stand, in a blind to shoot hogs or whatever, was in Alabama, under your predecessor, and it was on the Stimson Wildlife Management Area, which is a sort of an iconic place in Alabama anyway. And here we had CEOs sitting with state directors and shooting deer together and fishing together. And I think of course COVID stopped that conference, that annual conference, as it did a lot of others. But I think in that 15 years we built a lot of good relationships there that we didn't have. I mean, are you still seeing that? You're still involved in all that? Are you still seeing an improvement in relationships with our industry partners?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was one of the first meetings I can remember going to as an agency director because I wanted to be a part of the industry agency. We went to Federal up in Minnesota. So I won't ever forget that. That was one of the first meetings I went to. And now, when Jim was with NSSF and working with Tom Decker at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, doing partner with the payer programs, and we hosted a big one here in Alabama where we had members from the National Shoot Sports Foundation, Archery Trade Association, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, our agency staff, on a piece of property that we used excise tax dollars to buy, and where people know this is how we're spending your money. This is what we're doing for your customers, and it makes everything go a whole lot better when you're transparent, you're upfront, and people understand what's going on. And that industry agency relationship is invaluable.
Speaking of transparency, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that the Partner with the Payer program, which is the continuation of the old business summit where we put those partners together. First time I ever heard that phrase, Jim Cucarudo said it at an industry agency summit in Kennesaw, Georgia, as a proposal. He says we need to do more of this, and it grew from there. And of course he's moved on to a nonprofit, and Tom Decker and the folks at the Office of Conservation Investment have taken and run with it, and that's great. We need 100 of those. We need everybody talking about this partnership. So.
But that's one of the reasons why we went into the Connecting with Conservation podcast, because we want to bring in the end users as well. We know there's three parts to conservation: wildlife agencies doing all the hard work, industry paying a chunk of the bill, but the 60 million hunters, anglers, trappers, and shooters, without them buying those $1.5 billion worth of licenses and using it and supporting your efforts, we've got to connect with them as well. That's kind of the reason why we got this podcast going, because doing a couple events a year is great, and connecting and shaking hands, but we got to reach the masses here. So hopefully these podcasts will do that. But I want to go back and ask you one more topic here that, I can't ask a lot of people this because it's, it's to the point, but, you guys manage your job to manage wildlife and take care of wildlife. And sometimes people misuse wildlife, whether they know it or not. Oh, there's a baby fawn and there's no mom around. I'm going to have a pet. Or, there's a squirrel and I'm going to name him Peanut. Or there's a possum in Alabama and I'm going to name him Donovan. So tell us, I mean, you just got to educate folks on what are the laws about owning wildlife and not owning wildlife. And what.
Yeah, and you brought it up earlier, the population growth, even in states that's rural like Alabama, is tremendous. So you got a lot of people that didn't grow up in the country like we did and understand life and death, that the world isn't a Walt Disney movie, and all things live in harmony. And it's our job to try to educate. And in some cases, it's our job to have to enforce laws. And yeah, owning wildlife, as John said earlier, it's a public trust resource. Everybody owns it, so you can't take possession of it and keep it as a pet. And a lot of that is for human safety and health concerns. It's not that we're being hateful, it's you've got kids. Sometimes you have to make decisions that they don't like, but you know it's in their best interest, and you think hopefully down the road they'll look back and say, yep, Dad, you were right. Sorry. Hopefully. Well, in a lot of cases, we're in that same boat. We have to do some unpopular things. And you mentioned Donovan, and we all know about Peanut the squirrel, but we have two or three every year that we have to go in. We had one guy that had Bucky. He caught Bucky when he was a fawn. Oh, Bucky would never hurt anybody. Well, when Bucky was 7, the guy went in his pen to feed him, and Bucky was cranky that day and broke an arm, broke a leg, punctured a lung, poked out an eye. I mean, the guy liked to bled to death before he drugged.
These weren't injuries to Bucky. These were injuries to the
These
owner.
were injuries to the owner of Bucky. Yeah. And, at that point, then they call us, y'all got to come do something. Well, we have to go clean up a mess that somebody made. Well-intentioned mess. Same thing where people move into an area. Oh, look, there's a little alligator. I'm going to feed it. Well, then that alligator grows, and all of a sudden you've got an 8-foot alligator that every time he feels a vibration with somebody walking down the bank, he slides up there looking for a free meal. And then we get called, oh, you got to come get this alligator. We're scared. Well, you shouldn't have fed the thing in the first place. Or you shouldn't have built your home in his home and then expected an alligator not to be there. Um, Jim, it goes on and on with people getting deer and putting collars on them where hopefully a hunter doesn't shoot them. And then some little kid walk up to it and they pop it, and then we get called, and then we're the bad people because we have to go remove the animal, just like the folks in New York. I mean, and again, the deer and the squirrels and all that, but you have people that are taking raccoons into their home where they've got kids and family and rabies possibilities. It just goes on and on.
And yeah, not only internal rabies, in the home, but once that animal gets domesticated and fed and picks up your germs of humans, and the owner decides to let it free, again, it's going to go infect, the wild population of. We've seen it in rabbits, we've seen it in avian flu, and all that stuff, and folks don't know the wildlife DNRs are the ones that manage all those. Uh, they do a lot of research for diseases and again, paid for by hats, but
Well, and I think this high path avian influenza is going to be a wake up call for a lot of people. It's it's in the milk now, it's in some other food products, and it's dangerous. And it's keeping wild animals is a bad idea. The media doesn't help because while somebody who catches something names it, the media it's sort of shifted from, people who commit violent crimes or whatever. When they talk about, they try not to mention their name as much, or that's sort of policy. They really need to do that with wild animals. It doesn't need to be Rocky the squirrel. It needs to be, this person had a wild squirrel illegally, because if you personify it or you anthropomorphize it into, you give it a human name or human characteristic, then you get, and a few months ago, there was an article out about a guy who had an emotional support alligator trying to get on an airplane. I'm sorry, I don't want to sit next to an emotional support alligator. I got nothing against alligators.
You can't make that stuff up. I mean, we had a regulation 2 years ago banning tegus in Alabama because they could get a loose. They could live in South Alabama where endangered indigo snakes and gopher tortoises are. So we had a guy show up to a public meeting that said his wife has an emotional support tegu. That's what they make dogs and cats for. I mean, you don't need an emotional support alligator or tegu. And most people are well intentioned. They don't want to see a baby squirrel die. They don't want to see a baby rabbit die. I understand that, but this is the natural world. Mother Nature can be a cruel and heartless so and so. And sometimes it's best just to walk away rather than try to do something like take in and we've had it. I could talk all day, people picking up a raccoon, carrying it 18 counties over, it's scratching somebody. They go to the health department. Well, the thing's got rabies, and that's a county that rabies has never been into, but they brought it from 18 counties away where we've been spending millions of dollars with bait drops with USDA to try to stop the westward progression of rabies. So, look, get a dog or a cat, parakeet, get a hamster, get some goldfish. Wild animals are wild animals, and no matter how cute and cuddly they are, one day, just like Bucky, it can go south on you real quick and they will go back to being wild animals.
Right. Well, we appreciate all that, the DNR, and there's thousands of unsung heroes that are dealing with this on a daily basis, from the good and the bad and the ugly. So, wanted to let folks know where they can find more information on, things they can do in Alabama: hunting, fishing, trapping, target shooting, and, any kind of last words to.
Yeah, pretty much anything we do in the state of Alabama that's got outdoor related recreation, you can go to outdooralabama.com and you can find everything from where to hunt, where to go shoot, where the state parks are, you name it. Fishing regulations in the Gulf, fishing regulations in freshwater. Everything we do is at outdooralabama.com.
You won't find where to buy a tegu there. So
you will not find where to buy tegu or how to rehab a illegally held raccoon. I mean it. Yeah, it. Look, I wish we could make this stuff up, but I hate to even say this, but we were in D.C. at AFWA XCOM talking to several other directors about peanut, and one of the other directors said, "I'll see your squirrel and I will raise you a breastfed raccoon." A lady actually took a kit raccoon. She had an infant who she was breastfeeding. She breastfed the raccoon, and the raccoon turned out to be raccoon. Now, guys, you can't make that up.
Chuck, we appreciate you being on. You're a long-term friend of ours and doing a great job in Alabama. I hope you're there for many, many more years. Although if you're like me, you start to feel like you're getting long in the tooth.
Yeah, this used to be not white.
Well, you're doing great work down there. It's one of my favorite states. My mom's birth state. So she was born in Selma, Alabama. So I always like to see good things coming out of there. But we appreciate you being on, Jim. As always, good to see you again. And to our listeners, please continue to listen. Pick up some more of our episodes. Subscribe to us. That always helps us. And we'll see you in the woods or on the water.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Please do us a favor and tell your buddies, friends, family, and others about what you've learned here today. If you like what you heard, come on back anytime and listen to another episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast.